Welcome back to the HUD, everyone. I'm Zacharoni, and before we start, let me just say that this channel is welcome to everyone. No matter who they are or where they came from, we are all equal on this planet. So without further ado, please be seated, and here's what's on my completed menu so far. On March 8th, 2020, I started playing Half-Life, and then on April 2nd, 2020, I beaten the game. Back in 2007, I got the orange box for the PS3. Yeah, go ahead, point fingers at me and laugh because of how the performance on that platform was. And the game I wanted to play was Team Fortress 2. But I didn't have an online account at the time, really. So to keep me occupied, I decided to play Half-Life 2, along with episode 1 and 2 that came with it. And after playing them, I did not regret it. Then 13 years later, I thought I'd give the first game a go, and when I started playing it, I was presented with a lot of things that had passed its time now, like loading times that pop out unexpectedly when entering a new room. Security guards and scientists got the same face and body types, and they are also complete idiots when they don't follow you. Human enemies can take more bullets than the aliens. And jumping. Like, a lot of jumping. And I don't think they got a lot of jumping in the second game, really. Combine that with fall damage that can take a huge chunk of health for how high you fall, and you start to understand why this is a bad idea in the first place. But despite all that, I still actually enjoyed Half-Life. It's got a good story involving conspiracy, puzzles are well put together, like utilizing the train tracks or taking care of this creepy green tentacle claw monster, and the Magna is a saving grace because it's the most overpowered pistol in the game. As for the final slice, well, I finally understand why the sequel setting was in a pickle, but getting to it required me to go through Zen, the worst part of the game, and those who have played it will probably know what I mean. So I understand why Black Mesa was made and released under my nose when I got started with this leftover, but overall, I had a good time with the original Half-Life, but I still think the second game is still superior to it. Now the next thing to do is to examine my room, get a VR headset for the PC, and play Half-Life Alyx in the future. On March 29th, 2020, I started playing Doom Eternal's multiplayer. When id Software decided to create a multiplayer mode involving one Slayer vs 2 demons instead of the traditional deathmatch or capture the flag style modes, I was kind of curious of how this is going to work. So, on my first attempt, I decided to play as the Slayer, and I suck being the Slayer in this mode. Mainly because I'm not the type of player who is quick on their feet against two control players that can try and hinder my chances of winning, which is actually the whole point really. In fact, if this feels like Nightmare mode, then I know I'll not last that long with the real mode in single player. Playing as the demons, on the other hand, was the most fun I had in this mode. Especially when you have a lot of time to think on how to take down the Slayer while he's taking care of the minions you have placed in front of him. But while it's unique with the two players controlling the map against the overpowered Slayer, and it does work because the Slayer can still win matches as well as the demons, I don't think I'll be returning to this mode anytime soon really. It's still fun to play, don't get me wrong, but it just can't hold a candle to the single player campaign, and we actually all knew that really. Oh, and if this was fixed before it was up, I've been having trouble with voice chat because the voices were coming out of the monitor, but not my headphones for some reason. On April 1st, 2020, I started playing Doom 64, and then on April 9th, 2020, I beaten the game. So, after completing Doom Eternal, I moved on to the other Doom that I got at launch, more specifically Doom 64, which I'm aware that it's not the first original Doom, but I will try that Doom out in the future, and probably add the mod that increased the violence to Ultra, or Brutal as they like to call it. So the obvious comparison is that this is a slower experience than the newer Dooms, and that's okay really because it's calm and laid back without the metal soundtrack. Oh, and the super shotgun is still my bread and butter. However, while it's still enjoyable to play, the levels feel small and cramped, given that this is a port of the N64 title, and despite having save slots, they didn't bother to put in an autosave feature in this version. So when I got back into this after doing my leftover videos, I discovered the game didn't save my progress automatically, losing all my belongings in the process. But luckily, the game has a password feature that shows up after completing levels, so I managed to get all my belongings back and remembered to save constantly after completing a level. Well, most of the time really. As for the final slice, well, it started off with a horde of demons, but then it shoves in one final boss that was challenging, but I think they were trying too hard with this one really, because it can launch projectiles that can lock onto me, that were irritating to get away from. So while Doom 64 is slower and smaller than the recent Dooms, I still enjoyed this N64 port. But as time goes by, I might overlook it with the original Doom and its brutal mod in the future. On April 11, 2020, I started playing Crypt of the Necrodancer's DLC, Amplify, and then on April 14, 2020, I gave up on the final boss. Now I said in my opinions video for Crypt of the Necrodancer, I beaten the final boss, but when I boot up the game again for Amplify, I discovered that the game still got some more story content and there was a proper final boss that I didn't realize that was in the main game. And no, this is not Amplify, I'm talking about the main game without Amplify. But enough about the main game, let's talk about the DLC, shall we? So Amplify comes with a new stage which featured an environmental trick, where I stand on a glowing line that caused connected damage when I strike a single enemy, which really comes in handy against multiple enemies that are surrounding me. Plus, there's a new character named Noctua, if I pronounce her name right, who had her own storyline and an interesting mechanic that turns her into a bat when her health is low, and she can recover health from striking enemies, which is all backed up by an impressive soundtrack. However, her final slice started off challenging, but then it had too much sauce when it was filling the screen with a lot of enemies, which makes it irritating for me to take down the proper adversary of her story. In fact, the final boss in the 5th chapter was actually well designed and challenging compared to this one, making me think, what was the point of making that boss if this one was actually more satisfying than that really? So overall, I still had a good time with Amplify with its new features and character, but I don't want to play the final slice again for the safety of my keyboard, monitor, and mouse, if you know what I mean. On April 17th, 2020, I started playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, and on April 23rd, 2020, I started playing the original Final Fantasy VII. Then on May 15th, 2020, I finished the main story in the original, and then on May 26th, 2020, I finished the main story in the remake. Yeah, that's right, I'm putting both of these titles in one opinion and comparing them to one another, because halfway through the game, a friend of mine just come out of nowhere and just shoved a stop sign straight in my face, telling me that I had to play the original before I get to the ending of the remake. And so I did. And after finishing the original, I actually prefer it in pacing, but not in gameplay, which is not bad, even if the cutscenes look like something out of Robot Chicken. It's just not my cup of tea really. Mainly because the battle system was too much for me. I mean, the active time battle is interesting, forcing me to make my actions quicker, but I think I prefer to have characters wait their turn slapping each other instead of waiting for a meter to fill up to make certain actions. No offense, Pro Jared. But luckily, the Switch version I played got some interesting features for people who can't stand these type of games. These include turning off and on random encounters anytime so I can hike back to the shops without losing any health, speeding the game up by ×3, which is useful to speed through those summoning animations, and the big one, regenerating everything from health, magic, and the limit gauge, which might sound cheating, but when it comes to Final Fantasy, people are either here for the story, gameplay, or both really. Now that I completed the original and understand the plot, which I actually enjoyed, I went back to the remake where I left off. So the first thing I said about the remake is the gameplay, where it plays like an action game, but they added commands that slows the game down, and I like this because it gives me enough time to think. But I wish my party members would do more stuff during battle, like giving me health via Kingdom Hearts instead of me manually commanding them to do it. Then I said I prefer the original in pacing because when I started playing the original, the City of Midgard chapter was quicker, and I was presented with a whole world to explore. This one, however, spends a lot of time in Midgard with more character building and scenarios that didn't appear in the original, like in chapter 4 where I was introduced to a character that I didn't spot in the story of the original. And yes, I'm aware that this is an episodical game, but Was it really necessary to add in a battle arena and a haunting train yard during our adventure? And after finishing the game, I went to talk to the friend that recommended me to play the original and, well, if it is an attempt to make up for that one moment in the original, then they obviously got a lot to live up to, really. But I did enjoy the story for what it tells for both of these games, with heroes to root for and villains to throw tomatoes at. Also, I like the materia system for both games, where you can add magic spells, special moves, and I can connect a special materia with an elemental materia to do extra melee damage, which leveled up the more you use them. So there were a lot of options for experimentation before every fight, and saying this right now, I should have played the original properly to realize this. But I was rushing to complete the remake so that I don't have a lot on my hands really. As for the final slice, well, given that the final chapter takes place before the team escape from Midgar, they mix it up with a motorcycle section that has an on-the-road boss fight that was pretty epic. Then they've thrown in one more boss fight which seems unnecessary if you play the original. But it was still good in the end, and I'm eager to find out how are they going to top it up in the second part. Oh, and I can't compare the original final boss because the remake is not complete yet. But I will say that the music for that fight sounds so spectacular that I understand why this piece of music is so iconic to the fans of the franchise. So I understand why the original is an all-time classic, but with its outdated graphics and gameplay, it can be hard for new players like me to appreciate. But I'll give it another chance in the future to play it, probably. As for the remake, well, it may be too cinematic, and you need a lot of knowledge from the original to understand its newer details to the plot. But overall, I enjoyed this remake. But let's just hope we get more freedom this time in part 2. On April 30th, 2020, I started playing Streets of Rage 4, and then on May 1st, 2020, I beaten the game on normal difficulty. So, after playing through the original Final Fantasy VII, I needed something to refill my joy factor again. And that's when I heard that Streets of Rage 4 was just around the corner, and I thought, I might as well play a game where I get to hit something repeatedly. Now, I have played the first Streets of Rage game on the first console I had when I was little, the Sega Mega Drive/Genesis, and being little, I couldn't get the hang of it. Then a few years later, I played the second game in a compilation, and the one element that frustrated me was doing special moves takes away my health, which I understand it was a risk-reward idea really. But now in the fourth game, Lizard Cube has added a new mechanic that allows me to recover my health just by attacking enemies without them hitting me. And it works because it forced me to get confidence on taking a chance to recover it back. Combine that with meaty gameplay, a ton of moves that are satisfying to pull off, and boss fights that are fun to take down, including the final boss, and you got a worthy successor to the first two Streets of Rage games. Though the only nitpick I have is the inclusion of a live system in the main mode, and the worst part about it is that if you lose all your lives, you have to start the level all over again. Luckily though, they do have the option to give you extra lives at the cost of deducting your overall score when you try again. But I don't think I'll be getting a score over 1 million like these chaps on the leaderboard anytime soon. But in conclusion, I found Streets of Rage 4 surprisingly good, and if Lizard Cube keeps this up, we could see obsolete franchise like Kid Chameleon, Comic Zone, and Alex Kidd making a comeback in the future. Oh, and Gunstar Heroes of course. On May 7, 2020, I started playing Razm's challenges for Indivisibles, and then on June 5, 2020, I finished all the challenges. When I heard that Indivisibles was getting a DLC starring the depressing old lady with a tiger skin on her head, I was a bit skeptical because it featured challenges involving platforming and special fights than the other DLC we were promised. I mean, back in my opinion on the main game, I said that the platforming was meh, or in other words, average, with jumps that don't quite hit the mark, and in combat, you felt overpowered, with bosses that are a cakewalk to take down later on in the game. But in Razm's challenges, however, they are actually well put together, with stages that required me to use my abilities, and the fights are quite challenging, ranging from a goat that can refill its health, and a group of warriors that are referenced to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Each of them requires me to be creative with my attacks that are limited, and my button timing for blocking incoming attacks that are devastating if I'm not careful. As for the final slice, well, the reward wasn't that special, but the final challenge were tough and satisfying to take down, and the ending, without spoiling anything, was actually pretty satisfying really, because it all worked out in the end between Ajna and Razmi. However, my big complaint about the DLC is that there's no autosave when you complete a challenge. So when I returned to the game to complete a new challenge, I suddenly found out that I have to do that challenge all over again because I didn't save it manually. Which can be easy to forget once you fail a challenge multiple times, and then after you've finally beaten it, you called it a day without even realizing it. But despite all that, Razmi's challenges was actually a nice return to Indivisible that is well balanced in the main campaign itself, and something told me that it should have been in the first place. Just saying really. On May 28th, 2020, I started playing Shantae and the 7 Sirens, and then on June 5th, 2020, I beaten the main story with only 70% of the game discovered. The last Shantae game, Half Genie Hero, was a graphical step up from its 16-bit sprites, and the 7 Sirens still retain that, with hand-drawn character designs and animated cutscene that should have been in the last game. But I think we'll blame Beck number 9 for that really. Wink wink. But while it's good with its cast of characters, tight controls, and transformations that are now tied to multiple buttons, I think they should have done more with its other features in the game. One of them is the collectible card system where they can be used to augment her abilities, but by the time I found my preferred set, I had no use with the other cards that I have collected. Next we have food that are dropped from enemies, and at first I was expecting this to have a cooking mechanic, but by the time I got far in the game, I found out that there was not a single chef to volunteer, and they were just used to refill my health really. And because of this, I felt way overpowered, resulting in bosses, which are stunning to look at, are easy to take down, especially with the power-ups and attack power for her when she's fully upgraded. Plus, backtracking to find a certain item to proceed through the story is irritating because they don't quite indicate on where it is exactly. Not even some of the NPCs were helpful, with a few exceptions of course. As for the final slice, well, it's a sight to behold and satisfying to take down, but I found the plot twists that lead up to it predictable really. But don't get me wrong, I still think Shantae and the 7 Sirens is a good game, but after the last Shantae game, Half Genie Hero, I was expecting them to do better with this one. Well, at least this game ended with a cliffhanger, so let's hope they make it up with an installment that wraps up the mystery about a certain character that Shantae is related to in a satisfying way. On June 23rd, 2020, I started playing SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, and then on June 28th, 2020, I beaten the game with 100 golden spatulas found after the final boss. Growing up, I was a huge SpongeBob fan where I constantly watched every episode and play every game that I discovered, but the one that I started off with and is the closest to my heart was Battle for Bikini Bottom, developed by Heavy Iron Studio. And when I heard that Purple Lamp Studio was making a remake, I was kinda surprised given that it was a TV license game, but I guess it was really special to a lot of players and speedrunners alike really. But why did I like Battle for Bikini Bottom? Well, it may be a little slower than the newer 3D platformers, but I still find it enjoyable to play, especially with the cast of characters like Sandy who can use her lasso in creative ways. Plus, the level design that are based off areas from the original show is well represented, like Jellyfish Field, the Mermalair, and my personal favorite, Rock Bottom. However, while I still like Battle for Bikini Bottom, I think they should have done more with this rehydrated version. In fact, 2 characters, Mick the Krabs and Mermaid Man, didn't have their iconic actors to reprise their role in the original, and with the remake, I was expecting the developers to recast those 2 since they didn't sound like them from the TV show. Well, Mr. Krabs in particular. I did know that Ernest Borgnine isn't with us anymore, but maybe they should have hired a sound-alike for him really. Plus, the final slice in the original was a bit of a letdown because it feels like you have done your job, which was satisfying, but then the plot says you got more to do, but the game doesn't really have anything left to do with it. And once I collected all the golden spatulas and defeat the final boss, I would treat it with a moment that was a nod to the franchise, but it wasn't a sweet victory. But in the rehydrated version, I collected all the golden spatulas after I defeated the final boss, and then nothing happened. And then I said to myself, well, looks like it's time to defeat the final boss all over again. But when I got there, I found out that the area was completely empty, and it's the same with the other bosses as well. So it seemed like they forgot to add in a program that allowed you to reset the fights next time you visited. Really, I mean, what are all these people cheering about? There's nobody coming. Also, I did try out the cooperative multiplayer where you fight against waves of robots, but I got bored of it real quickly and I didn't touch it again. Which is a real shame because it's got the Robo Squidward that was cut out from the original, and it got SpongeBob Pet Snail Gary as a playable character, for some odd reason, but it was still humorous to look at. But despite the game feeling like a skeleton with Unreal Engine skin covering it, SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated is a good return to a licensed game that has got a lot of love for being true to the franchise, from its locations, characters, and memes. So now that's all the games I've beaten, what about the ones I'm still playing? Well, there's Valhalla, which I have finished, but I started a New Game Plus to see some of the extra things it had to offer. But I didn't have time to finish it really, so I'll be sharing my opinions on this when it reached October. And just yesterday, I posted my top-ins video for Ninjala, the free-to-play ninja multiplayer that I'll be playing for the next 3 months. So this will be like a 3-month supply of Ninjala until the beginning of October. But check back with me later for extra source videos for this game, and I'll tell you what I think of Ninjala, Valhalla, and all the other games I've been playing in a completed menu. And if you like what you see, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Plus, stay in touch with my Twitter page, link in description down below. But until then, I'm Zacharoni. Enjoy your pizza, remember to wash your hands, and I'll see you next time.